Hello and welcome to my breakdown of the Final Fantasy XVI Ambition trailer. I wanted to make this video to kind of go over new information that I picked out of the trailer because I've been obsessing over it all day with the release of the trailer. So with that said, I'm going to assume that you've seen the past two trailers, that you've kind of read the information on the website, the character bios. I'm going to kind of refer to them. If you haven't, you can go read them or watch it. And besides that, let's get into it. So starting off, we're looking at this book that's opening. Reminds me of Heaven's Word from Final Fantasy XIV. I'm going to stop here on the map to make things a little more clear. I'm actually going to cut to a map posted by a user uVinaruni on the Final Fantasy XVI subreddit. The reason I want to show this image particularly is because I've been seeing a lot of people online confused about where certain things are. This image really kind of hammers home where things are. Another terminology I just want to set forth here is the Eastern continent is Ash, the Western continent is Storm. That's going to come up later. So with that, let's keep moving on in the trailer. And so here, the narrator, who I presume is Jill, mentions that the forebears died 1,500 years ago. Keep that number in mind. That's really the only important part. The scene here is probably just depicting the ruins of this lost civilization. So here we have Clive being broody as usual, walking out in the Deadlands, looking to the horizon at the sunrise. His armor is the same armor that we see in the Awakening trailer, so that kind of indicates that this might be right after that meeting where they go and hunt for Shiva's dominant. And he also still has that mark on his face from the Awakening trailer. Some people think that mark is always going to be there. I have a feeling it might disappear at some point in the story, but we'll get to that. So this is the first kind of important scene. So that guy with the two swords just so happens to be Ramuh's dominant, as we find out later in the trailer. The other thing that is currently theorized, and was kind of theorized before this trailer, is that Ramuh's dominant is actually Cid, and it might make sense that this man's Cid. If he is Cid, that bigger guy behind him, who is carrying something, I have a feeling that guy could potentially be Biggs. He looks big, like most Biggs do, and it would be kind of interesting to keep him paired along with Cid, kind of like the way he is in Final Fantasy XIV. Besides that, like I mentioned, Biggs is carrying something. That thing that he is carrying just so happens to be Shiva's dominant, who we all assume at this point is Jill. And behind them is Torgal, the canine companion that Clive has throughout this journey that we've learned about in a Yoshida interview. Alright, darkness spreads. We see this kind of weird tower looking thing. This looks like some endgame place, probably. That's some place buried in the Blight that we'll go to late game. I'm going to slow things down so you can see them because they flash by pretty fast. We start with a giant crystal. It's kind of hard to place it exactly, and this isn't on the map, but it looks like the Crystalline Dominion crystal, so I think this is just another angle of it. The next crystal we see is a quick shot of Drake's Breath, the crystal near Rosaria, and the home of Phoenix. The next one is this big mountain. This is Drake's Fang. It is near Dhalmekia, and it is the Titan crystal. The next crystal is this towering purple crystal. This crystal is Odin's crystal. It is Drake's spine, and it is in the kingdom of Waloed. Then we have the Crystalline Dominion again, so this is from another angle, and we see the main city. We then have a conversation between Joshua and his father. Nothing really important here. Just that the crystals bless us and are important, as we already knew. Alright, so here we have a look at the Grand Duchy of Rosaria main castle. In this conversation, Clive talking to his father, and there's the guy from the Awakening trailer, and we'll see him later again in this trailer. This is the Holy Empire of Sanbreque, and we see Drake's head behind it. This is the Light Mother Crystal and the home of Bahamut. Here we see Bahamut's dominant, Dion Lesage, as we know now from the website, talking to what some assume to be the Emperor. I will make a note here. If you look on the right, you'll see some feet kicking. That's the feet of the child that we see in the Dominance trailer. That child is sitting in front of the old guy who's speaking. So that kid is more important than that old guy. That might mean that the kid's the actual Emperor. Maybe there's an Emperor name, and that's the old guy, and then that kid is the God Emperor. With that said, we also know that Dion is the Crown Prince, so it's possible that he is either the son of the old guy talking, and like I said, the kid's the God Emperor, or this is like a separate family branch, and the kid's father died, and the old guy is ruling the realm until the kid comes of age, which is typical for a medieval setting. In this conversation, the old man says that everyone in Storm will soon bow to their Emperor. So this is kind of what I mentioned earlier, where Storm is the Western continent. So it's basically just confirming that the Empire wants to control all of the Western continent, which is pretty typical for an Empire. Next up is Dhalmekia. Only thing we really learn is that Hugo isn't really a warmonger. He doesn't really want war, which kind of makes sense for Comrades-led nation. Iron Kingdom. This is our first time actually really seeing anything about them other than maybe some of the warriors in the cutscenes. We see who I assume is some sort of leader for the Iron Kingdom at Drake's Breath. Behind him in the scene is the Mother Crystal itself for Drake's Breath. Probably some sort of confrontation there. Plus, he basically reconfirms what we already kind of knew about the Iron Kingdom, which is that they hate dominance and their ether. Waloed, we see the crystal here. We see the other side from the scene from the Dominance trailer of Benedicta sleeping with the King of Waloed and Odin's Dominant, who we now know as Barnabas. I'm going to stop here on this scene. We see Barnabas coming out of the dark. This is probably just some Odin power of his, but the interesting part, other than the fact that he looks like the Warrior of Darkness, is when you look behind him, the sea is parted. So he probably uses Zantetsuken to part the sea with a slice of his sword. So remember earlier when I told you to make a note of that 1500 year ago remark that the narrator made? Well, this is where it pops up. The narrator remarks in the year 860, the Empire marches on Rosaria. So doing some quick math, 1500 years ago when the forebears died is a lot longer than the year 860. So that to me indicates that there was some major historical event that happened 860 years ago, maybe the first appearance of the Blight, it's really anyone's guess. And I imagine that event may be a keystone to the main story, but we need to learn more through more trailers and probably playing the game. Alright, getting back to the trailer, we see some Imperial assassins that were sent to Rosaria to either kill the Duke or Joshua or both, but they're obviously being used in some way to try to win the war that the Empire is waging. We then see the scene from the Awakening trailer. You'll notice that the guy who cuts off the Duke's head is actually wearing Rosarian armor. So the Duke was betrayed by a Rosarian soldier. We then see a character that you may or may not recognize from the Awakening trailer. We actually saw this character way back in the Awakening trailer helping fight with Clive. So chances are this is going to be a character that kind of follows us around as young Clive that helps us. Maybe they're just a friend of the family type deal. They're obviously here with the Duke and Joshua, so they seem somewhat important. Moving on, we see the scene where Joshua is sprayed with blood and the Duke's head comes rolling off his body. And I definitely think we're getting a mature rated Final Fantasy game. Alright, this is our first look at a person who might just be the antagonist for this game. A lot of people say he looks Ascian. Kinda does. He turns into Ifrit, which I've always kind of thought, but a lot of people have kind of thought that the original Ifrit was Clive. But after the Dominus trailer with the two Ifrits on screen at the same time, I always assumed that the first Ifrit was evil and attacked Joshua. Clive comes in to rescue his brother, but now we just have confirmation of that. All right, interesting bit here is Joshua losing control and his eyes go orange. Throughout all of the trailers, if you haven't been paying much attention, the eyes have kind of been an important thing. They're usually either blue or orange. After the last trailer, I kind of assumed that orange either meant that they were dark versions of the summons, or now what I think is probably much more likely is orange represents when their emotions get out of control and the kind of deeper icon takes over, like the dominant loses control of the icon. You will see multiple scenes in this trailer where people have orange eyes and people have blue eyes, like the same person. In fact, here, next scene, we see Ramuh, or I'm going to refer to him as Sid. We see Sid starting to kind of transform, channel his powers as the dominant of Ramuh, and his eyes start glowing blue. So he's very much in control of his emotion at this point. Next scene, Hugo, orange eyes. So it's kind of a theme. In this next part, we see a woman who's apparently enslaved. This woman looks like she might be post-time skip Jill. She is almost definitely Shiva. And I'm going to use this time to disclaim that we don't know for sure that Jill is Shiva, just that it's pretty likely based on how it looks. So with that said, I'm going to assume that Jill is Shiva. And it looks like Jill was definitely captured probably around the same time that the Empire invaded. Whether this means that the Empire captured her or some other faction captured her is yet to be seen. I will say based on the armor and the foreign language they spoke, it seems more like the Iron Kingdom to me. They also don't trust Dominus at all, so her treatment would line up with that. But we're going to have to wait for a little more information before we can make a definitive answer. All right. This is a scene that a lot of people might look over. Remember how I said two swords is a signifier that it's Sid? Here we go. Two swords. And then we see this like white, stony looking thing on their arm. And actually in that previous scene, it wasn't translated, but apparently in the Japanese version, the person makes a comment referring to Jill as turning to stone. So I think they're just showing off here what that kind of looks like. And it also gives some insight as to what's going on with Sid, what his motives may be. He kind of knows he's on the clock, right? It's starting to take over his whole arm. He doesn't have a lot of time left, probably. It kind of exemplifies that by then showing this death scene where there's just this guy turned to stone on this bed. I'm not positive who is here on the left. It could be Sid. but it's kind of hard to tell without seeing his face. Next up we have Hugo, Dion, and Benedicta all kind of losing their minds as they presumably transform. The most interesting one is Benedicta. You see some blood splatter on her face, so something just happened and she's screaming, and then it zooms in and her eyes go orange. This goes back to what I was saying earlier. When these dominants lose control of their emotions, it seems like the inner icon kind of comes out and takes control, and they stop thinking rationally, and I think we're seeing that here. We then see a partial transformation of Benedicta into Garuda, not a full one. Notice how Benedicta's eyes are actually blue with this partial transformation. That tells me that this partial transformation is from a different part of the game than the cut we just saw, right? So they cut the trailer to make it a little more misleading. But that lends a little credibility to my theory, just because we see the same exact person with blue and orange eyes in this trailer. We then have a shot of a partially transformed Shiva with blue eyes, and that leads directly into a fight scene between Garuda and Ramu, or Benedicta and Cid. Again, both of these characters have blue eyes. This is then followed up by a fight scene that we've already seen in the Dominance trailer between Clive and Hugo. Notice Hugo definitely has blue eyes. And the other thing to take away here, and we saw this in the Dominance trailer and some people thought it was like a visual bug, I'm pretty sure Clive does not have his cheek tattoo in this scene. If you remember in the Awakening trailer, it's actually a brand to mark the people who are hunting these Dominants. I have a feeling it's going to be a character growth moment of Clive when he gets the mark removed, and I think it might even leave him scarred, as we will see later on in this trailer. Now that we see the full UI in this fight and the upcoming Benedicta fight, there are a couple updates. One, our limit gauge isn't identical to the Final Fantasy XIV one anymore. It's not just 3 equal sized bars. It's like 1 big bar and then maybe 2 small bars. Second, there's a new UI element in the bottom right above our command menu. These 3 pill-shaped things with different colors all represent cooldowns actually for the 3 icons. They wanted the player to be able to see what's on cooldown with a glance without having to swap to another icon. Also in this Benedicta fight, take a look at the background. We are definitely near the Empire of Sanbreque capital, because there's their mother crystal. We then have a human Clive versus Odin fight. Odin here has blue eyes. Also, the fight looks really sick. Then we have Garuda coming up and grabbing Clive from over a cliff. You'll notice here, Garuda actually has orange eyes. Probably reason for this, she has a giant cut across her face, so we probably messed her up and she's probably kind of pissed. We then have an Ifrit trying to grab Barnabas. The Ifrit has blue eyes, so that's probably us and we're in control. And Barnabas just conjures a sword out of darkness apparently and cuts our hand away. We then have a Titan Ifrit fight. We kind of saw this in the Dominance trailer, so this isn't that new. And we have the Icon of Fire versus Phoenix fight, also from the Dominance trailer, where Phoenix gets one shot by Hellfire. There's this one frame of a really dark landscape before the explosion goes off, and it's kind of interesting because these pillars kind of remind me of the pillars that we saw earlier in the trailer with that tower in the Deadlands. So I wonder if this fight might be taking place there. We then have a Ifrit versus Bahamut icon fight, and this looks like it's taking place near the top of the Tower of the Crystalline Dominion, from the best I can tell. They gave us some cool explosions that might be hiding some info. Here is probably the best shot that we have of Shiva's dominant. She definitely looks a little different than Jill, but you have to remember this is a person who's going from 12 years old to probably like 17 or 18 after the time skip. So she's the right gender and has the right hair color to be Jill, but it's definitely not 100% yet. The directors of the trailer also very deliberately made it look like Jill was challenging Barnabas. But if you look at the lighting and kind of the context, I believe that these are actually 2 different scenes directed at 2 different people. We then have Clive and Hugo shouting that they're going to kill each other. Only thing to note here is that Hugo has blue eyes. We then get a series of face shots of most of the main dominants. The only one that I think is important here is actually the Clive shot. So it's kind of hard to see because of all the effects going on, and I think that was intentional. If you look at Clive, there's 2 things that stand out to me about him. Now, there's a lot of wind going on because of the explosion or whatever is happening in front of him. So maybe it's the hair from the back of his head coming forward, but the hair on his cheek is down towards the bottom of his nose, which is longer than it is in any of the 20-year-old Clive shots that I've seen. Then on top of that, if you look at his left cheek, there appears to be something missing. There is no brand on his left cheek. What you kind of see instead is a possible scar or something to that effect right underneath his left eye that travels down his cheek. So I think this kind of gives support to what I said earlier about him losing the brand later on. And that brings us to the end where we get to talk about this tapestry. This tapestry has caused a lot of discussion in the community. Let's go left to right. At the top, you see Garuda, Ramu, Titan below them, Shiva in the middle. Bottom right, we see Odin. Right above him is Bahamut, and above him, that looks like a sea serpent. That's probably Leviathan. What's caused most of the debate, though, is this icon at the top. You see, he kind of looks like a combination of Ifrit and Phoenix. A lot of people are even theorizing that this is a new icon named Diablos. And this would fill the hole, as the 7 icons below cover every element other than fire. So fire is the one that's missing, so this top one's probably a fire icon. The other thing to note is that this icon doesn't have a halo like the other 7. So maybe he's some sort of demonic creature. Maybe he's a betrayer of the original god. This would also go well with the logo for the game, since that's Phoenix and Ifrit fighting. Really though, we're gonna need some more info because, as you may have noticed, in the Dominance trailer, there was a second Earth icon. Many people are speculating that that's Golem, but that icon is not represented here. So there are definitely other possibilities as to what this icon may be, but considering they ended the trailer on this image and like zoomed in on this one specific icon, you can be sure that this is a key point that the developers wanted to hammer home, that this is an important thing. And so that brings me to the end of the video. Thank you for slogging through this with me. It probably wasn't the most entertaining video, but hopefully it was at least informative. Like I might have mentioned at the beginning of the video, I kind of want to make this video going over all of the levels that we've seen so far and seeing how the story may play out, assuming that the levels are accurate. That's something you can do for yourself, is kind of look. I've noticed a new discrepancy with this new trailer, but it's definitely a project that I'm interested in because I do think that there is information there that is useful. So if you want to see that video, you can go ahead and subscribe. No guarantees I'll make it or not. I'm obviously new to this YouTube thing. If you liked it, hit the like button. And besides that, hope you have a good day. Thanks. Bye.